hello everyone. I want to welcome you to University Express, Erie County Senior Services free lifelong learning program for older adults. Thank you for being here today. Senior Services' mission is to connect older adults with local resources that meet their unique needs. They offer great programs and services. The phone number to call for more information is 858-8526. And I'm your host today. My name's Dawn. I work right here at the Cheektowaga Senior Center. University Express now uses a key tag as a sign-in process for classes. We do have applications if you don't have one. If you prefer not to fill one out, just when you come into the class, tell them to mark you as other. University Express is now available at 26 different senior centers and libraries throughout Erie County. No membership is required at any location. So if you were to go to one of the senior centers that charges a non-member fee or a registration fee, that does not apply to University Express. So thank you for coming. Our classes can also be seen virtually, and many of our classes also can be seen pre-recorded on their webpage. Out of respect for our speaker and guests, please silence your cell phone. And I'm very excited to introduce our speaker, Tim Herzog.
Very good.
All right. Who is teaching today's class called Beer 101, Styles and Culture. So, Tim began home brewing in 1981. So were you 2? Probably, right?
This is my second year as an older
Right. Well, welcome.
Cheektowaga citizen. How did I do live in Cheektowaga?
Very good. So you can take advantage. He went down a slippery slope after that. Stops along the way included founding the Sultans of Swig Home Brewing Club, the New York State Craft Brewers Association, becoming a nationally certified beer judge, and serving 2 terms on the National Brewers Association Government Affairs Committee. In his spare time, Tim founded and built the Flying Bison Brewing Company, and he retired in November of 2022. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming out, even though it looks like it's going to snow outside. So we're going to talk a little bit about beer styles and beer culture and what each one plays on the other one. As I'm going along, if you have any questions or, I prefer this was more of a discussion, and this isn't college, we don't have to raise hands. So if you can ask your questions, just hey Tim and ask your question, please. So it's more fun if we all participate.
Are there any free samples?
There are not, because there is not a liquor license at the Senior Center. We did have preliminary discussions about let's see.
Did it work?
I was going the wrong way.
Okay.
There we go. About doing an event where the center could get a temporary license and we could do some beer sampling at the event. So keep an eye out on programming for that. I like doing this stuff. You may kind of figure that out as we go along. I kind of enjoy being here and talking with everybody. So, please participate, talk, ask questions, tell beer jokes, especially if they're about me. So. All right, so just so we're all kind of speaking the same language, this is our grocery list. Beer is made, we were talking before the class started about some of the, I'll refer to them as silly beers that are, graham cracker, lime, popsicle flavored, that's not what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about what I call beer flavored beer. That's beer that tastes like beer. And you should know, when I was working at Flying Bison, I tried to register a beer label where the brand of beer would be beer flavored beer. And the government wouldn't let me do it because there was no flavoring in the beer. And they said, well, what's the flavoring? I said, malted barley, hops, water, and yeast. That's the flavors of the beer. That's why it's beer flavored beer. And another brewer heard me say that, and they registered a label, beer that tastes like beer.
Oh.
They were allowed to do that. I wasn't allowed to do it. So anyway, malted barley is grain, grows in the field. There's a fair amount of malting barley being grown in New York State. Hops are a little tough to grow in New York State because our weather is so variable. If the winter's too cold, you're going to have trouble with your hops. If where barley, there's 2 seasons to grow it, and if one season fails, you still got one. Where with hops, just like grapes, if you have too cold of a season or too hot of a summer or too wet or too dry or too windy, you can not only have a tough crop for that season, you can have a tough crop for a year or two to come. Water, we live on 2/5 of all the world's fresh water. What do you do, swim in it or make beer with it? Very good, very good. You all get gold stars for that one. Malted barley. So as you can see in the picture on the left, you've got grain and these little kernels. What makes barley better for making beer than wheat? Wheat makes better bread, barley makes better beer. Barley has a husk that when you crack it open, it kind of holds together. So in the brewing process, that husk will act like a filter bed and hold the little pieces of cracked grain back and give you clear liquid coming through. So that's one of the reasons. The other is that it has a lot of carbohydrate, which is going to get converted to sugar in a process that brewers call mashing. So that carbohydrate is going to get broken down into simple sugars by the enzymes that are naturally present in the barley. All that the brewer is doing is making favorable conditions and standing around taking a lot of credit for it. And where wheat has a lot more gluten in it, and the gluten makes it denser, which makes more dough, that pasty, stretchy dough or pizza crust. My favorite bread is pizza crust. So, couple of buildings here. The one in the middle is Kleinschmidt Malting, and that's across the street from where the old Iroquois Brewery was on Pratt Street near Broadway. And Kleinschmidt, that's about half of the building. They did specialty malts, Munich style malts, dark malts, where across the street, Iroquois, which was a huge building, and an enormous brewery for Buffalo, was the largest brewery in the city of Buffalo. They malted all their own pale grain, and then Kleinschmidt did their specialties. And then the building on your far right, that's actually still around. If you drive along the 190 and you see a building that says Agway on it, or it used to, some of the sheet metal's been peeled off. That's an old malting company. So here's where some of them were. Curtis Malting Works, that's on Niagara Street. That's the building I just talked about. That was it was in Agway. Buffalo Malting, that building is still up. That's on Elk Street, and it's been bought by an architectural firm. And they actually rent some of the space to a small brewery called Brewer Brothers. And so you can actually go in the building and see how they modified some of the space. And then upstairs, where the big tanks, the center part of the big tanks were, is the architectural firm. And they have a big kind of bullpen area. And on the floor, it's a concrete floor, and where the big tanks were, the tanks were 3 stories tall. So there would be great big giant holes in the floor. One of their other projects was in Rochester, and they were redoing a gymnasium. So they saved big chunks of the gym floor and filled in those holes. So when you walk through the space, you can see where the tanks were. And then one of them, they left the wall of the tank on the 2nd floor, and they cut a door in it, put hinges on it, and they called that the think tank.
Oh.
They think they're funny. Perot Malting, that building is still up. It's over in Silo City, which is being the building that's called American Warehouse, right near Perot Malting, is being converted into apartments. Meyer Malting was on Niagara Street as well. And you probably remember seeing that building. It said Schaefer on it. It wasn't a Schaefer brewery. It was the Meyer Malting Company, but all the pale malt that they made there, they shipped down to Schaefer Brewing in Brooklyn. So the only place in New York State where more beer was made than Buffalo was Brooklyn. There were 35 breweries open and operating before Prohibition. In Buffalo, there were 36 in Brooklyn. Excuse me. And then Kleinschmidt over on Pratt Street. I showed you a picture of that brick building. So here's a picture of what malt looks like, and the lighting in this isn't the best, but you can get an idea for, you start with your malted barley as very pale malt, and then you toast it or roast it to different degrees of color and flavor. You can go amber, you can go darker amber, you can go brown, you can go black. And then the brewer adds different, 1% black malt or 3% amber malt to their pale malt, which is the base. And we were talking about dark beer before class started and how people seem to be afraid of dark colored beer. The difference between light colored beer and dark colored beer is instead of 100% of this malt, you use 99.3% of this malt and 0.7% of this malt, and that will make it a darker color and start to bring in flavors of toasted bread or caramel, or depending on what the roasts are, dark chocolate, coffee, espresso. So it's really just a little bit of malt that's making the difference in that beer. So these are hops. This picture happens to be taken in Belgium, and it was about 15 years ago. 2009, when there was a hop shortage, and the price of hops for small brewers went from about $2.75 to $3.25 per pound of dry hop flowers or pellets. So these bright green things on the left here, the kind of bright green dots, those are hop cones. So the one in my hand, so I'm the guy in the handsome blazer there, for the people that are zooming. Those are hop cones. They look like little green pine cones. And we'll see a close-up of one in just a second. But the price of those went from, let's say, $3 a pound for a round number to $19 a pound overnight. And if you didn't have contracts, and no small brewer in the whole world has contracts, you were in big trouble. So brewers use them as whole flowers, and that's kind of gone out of fashion. Not so much out of fashion, but it's not as practical to ship them because brewing is really a global economy. So Flying Bison here in Buffalo, speaking for us as one small brewery, we get hops from Australia, Tasmania, England, Ireland, Poland, Czech Republic, the Pacific Northwest, and we used to get a few from right here in Buffalo, but the local hop concerns are pretty much out of business. Weather is a problem for them. So dried flowers, some breweries use them. Pellets is what most brewers use, where these hop cones are lightly crushed and then pressed into a tube, and then a smaller tube, then a smaller tube, until they all kind of stick together. The oil inside the little glands in there kind of gets pressed out, binds it together, and they come out in little pellets, and it looks like rabbit food. What you put in the front end of the rabbit, not the pellets that come out of the back end of the rabbit. So, or an extract where those pellets are taken and slightly heated in a solution of alcohol to draw off either the pure alpha, just the bittering compounds, or just the aromatic compounds, just the nose, the oils. So the bottom three is what most brewers use now. Whole hops and even the dried hops are not used as much. If you see a process called wet hopped or dry hop, that somewhere in that beer they've used whole flowers. Either at the very beginning, that would be wet hopped, or at the very end, after beer's all fermented and all just about ready to get carbonated and packaged, they'll put some of those in the tank, bring the beer in, let it steep for 2 days, and that alcohol in the beer extracts out the nice smell from the hops. So in New York State, in the year 1916, there's not great records every year, but before Prohibition, the state of New York exported more hops to the rest of the world than the entire country of Britain did. That's how many hop farms there were in just New York State. So beer's a big thing here. And the New York hop belt, it was from Ithaca, Great Lakes, down to Poughkeepsie, where the winters aren't quite as harsh as they can be right here on the shore of the Erie Sea. And then the Cambria and Lockport farms. The Cambria farm was closed. Not sure about Lockport, and there was Gary out in Eden. I'm not sure where he stands with his. So that's what a hop cone looks like. That's actually a very big one. So that's my hand. And I'm actually that big, for those of you 9 feet tall, if you're at home. But this was, again, from that picture that I showed earlier. That was the hop field. All the hops in that field were going to get plowed under because it was such a great year. The farmer had way more hops than he needed, and he just supplied this one variety called Styrian Goldings to specialty breweries that were within about 100, 150 miles of his farm. They all took fresh hops or dried hop flowers, and so you had to get them there in a big hurry. But that was the year that supposedly there was a shortage. The short story of this is that the large brewers ganged up, tried to corner the market on hops, and press small brewers out of business. So it nearly worked, except for when it completely failed. So, water. As I mentioned before, we live on 2/5 of all the world's fresh water. The water in Lake Erie is very low in magnesium. There's no sulfur. There's no iron. What everybody complains about on their shower head or on their skin is the lime. If you want the lime out of your water, here's a science experiment you can do at home. So you are getting a homework assignment. So take a small saucepan and put some water in it out of your tap. Bring it to a boil, turn it off, let it sit overnight. When you come down the next morning, it will look like somebody threw a handful of salt, a couple pinches of salt in the pot. That's the lime. It's broken off during the boil, it's precipitated out, while brewing is boiling and cooling and fermenting. So that lime's going to come out anyway. So the lime really doesn't affect the water for brewers. So that's why this area was so good for brewers for so many. We're on our third wave of brewing coming through this part of the country. Cleanliness. I always said that cleanliness is not next to godliness in a brewery, it's in front of. It's in front of everything. It's got to be spotless. Everything. Some of that equipment is 25 years old. Still looks like it was just made yesterday. So freshness, we work with Triad Distributing. We're just available in Western New York. So it's very important to have somebody who understands that beer is food. Treat your beer like you treat your food. When you see, cases on sale, I'm going to get 5 cases and stack them in my garage. And when you lift your garage door, within about 2 hours, the beer's starting to spoil. So get beer from someplace that sells it fresh, bring it home, put it in your fridge, only buy what you're going to use. Don't buy 3 cases of beer if you only drink 1 6-pack a month. And if you don't drink 1 6-pack within a month, don't buy beer. Just go to a bar and buy one. Have one there. Don't let it sit around and get stale. So here's where we really start to get into style. So I hear lots and lots and lots, because I'm very old and I've been in the brewing industry a long time, that, well, I like beer, but I don't like ale. Ale is thick, it's dark, it's heavy. Or I like, my dad drank ale, so I don't drink that. I don't like lager, because he didn't drink lager. So let's straighten out again. Let's all get the right terms so we're all on the same page. Beer means fermented grain beverage. Okay? The ancient Aztecs used to make a type of porridge where they would take dried maize at the end of the season as the maize was growing, so in the heat of the summer, and they would take the leftover maize from the year before and crack it and soak it in water in these big shallow dishes, bowls, and they would climb up those big pyramids. They had very steady hands, evidently, and set that up there while they had their festival for 3 days, 5 days, however long they would go. And then they would go up and get those bowls, having been blessed by their gods, in quotes, bring it down, and they would consume that. And it was bubbling, and it was moving. It's the spirit of our gods in there, and they would consume it, and then they would get all waxed on still fermenting beer. So cracked grain in water, the sun heats it. Corn, it has very simple sugars. Those sugars fermented up very quickly, and then they would start throwing Vestal virgins into fires and things like that. So that was very primitive beer, but it was beer because it was grain and water and heated and fermented. So that's beer. So everything else that you see up here is beer, right? The things on the left-hand side of the screen is ale, and what ale means is it's fermented with yeast that works between about 55 to 60 degrees. Well, the starting point for most of them, let's say 60 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's going to ferment in about 5 to 7 days. It's going to move right along, and when you chill that down, it's going to drop out pretty well. It's going to clear out for the most part, except for the new cool beers, which are all hazy. Anyway, again, we're not going to talk about those. So the ones here are some of the styles of ale. So ale, beer. Let's go over to the other side. Lager, beer. Lager is a German word. It's a German verb that means to store, to put away, to warehouse, to let it rest. Lagerbier. So lager means that it's made with yeast that works between 45 and 55-ish degrees Fahrenheit. Everything is give or take a degree in either direction. Excuse me. And then it's cooled. And before packed refrigeration was invented, the way it was cooled was it was put into caves. Around this part where the land is relatively flat, they would dig big cellars and take the beer from fermenting vats, put it in barrels. It would still be kind of cloudy, and they would put it down into the caves, cellars, and they would cut big chunks of ice from the creeks and streams, the lake, the canal, once the Erie Canal was in, and they didn't drain it every year. And they would take that ice and wrap it in straw so that it would melt very slowly. So it kept the temperature very stable and very cool in those caves, and they would cold age the beer. So in brewing terms, lager means cold aged. So anywhere between a couple of weeks and a couple of months is cold aged. So somewhere below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And what that would do is get the yeast, because it ferments slower, the yeast is going to settle out or drop out of solution slower, so it needs to sit until it gets nice and clear. Right? So, as far as the, lager is heavy, ale is dark, a lot of this is old wives' tales, right? So we've got, on the far left, we've got cream ale, light, little on the sweet malty side. It's made with some rice to really lighten the body, lighten the color. Crisp, clean, dry, effervescent. Let's go to the left side of the lager column, and we've got Pilsner beer. Light, clean, crisp, yellow, effervescent. So now we've got an ale that's light, we've got a lager that's light. They're both yellow, they're both effervescent, they're both refreshing, one's a lager, one's an ale. Okay? So we can say that with everything else. I can get you a golden ale, I can get you a golden lager, I can get you a bitter ale, I can get you a bitter lager, which is not up here, it'd be called Frisian lager. I can get you a strong ale, I can get you a strong lager, I can get you dark ale, I can get you dark lager, I can get you malty ale, I can get you malty lager. So that, all ales are this or all lagers are that. No, these are families, We all have a family. Are all your siblings the same? No, they're all fairly different, right? My older brother's kind of a hermit. My sister's kind of a hypochondriac. My one brother lives in England. We're all fairly different. And I would bet many of your families are as well. Families of beer are the same. Each character is individual. Each one is different, right? So it's just learning what each of them smells like, tastes like, looks like, that helps you enjoy them to their fullest. Does that make sense? Do you have questions on that? Yes?
What is an IPA?
India. So IPA, India, pale ale, IPA. And what that means is It was a British pale ale, and as they were colonizing South Africa, India, they were trying to keep the troops' morale up, so they would ship them beer. And shipping the beer from England, it had to go across the equator, down around the tip of South Africa, and it would get dropped off there, or come back up across the equator again to go to India. The beer is really beat up at this point, and it would spoil. So what they found out was, over time and experimentation, science wasn't then what it is now, and a lot of the science that we have now, as far as food safety and so forth, was developed by the beer industry. Pasteurization, Louis Pasteur was not working with a dairy farmer. He was working with two brewers, one from Denmark and one from Germany, to develop a way to keep yeast in good shape and to make the yeast stop working when you wanted it to, so to get more control over the fermentation process. So pasteurization was really developed for the brewing industry. The fact that it works on milk, okay, great, good for kids. So the India Pale Ale thing, by making the beer stronger, so 6% or above, it stood a better chance. It tasted more like real beer when it got there. By putting more hops in the beer, and sometimes just whole hops right in the barrel while it's shipped, hops have natural antibacterial properties. So that helped keep the beer. So higher hopped, above 6% in alcohol, India Pale Ale. So that's where that comes from. It's probably the most overused. Pilsner was the first, and that's how Pilsner should be spelled. It's from the town of Pilsen in the Czech Republic. So a Pilsner is a person or an item from the town of Pilsen. There are 5 breweries in the city of Pilsen that make true Pilsner beer from all Czech malt, Saaz, primarily Saaz hops, cold aged, and some of them are actually fermented in oak fermenting tubs, which is a pretty old world, but one of the breweries still does it. And then it's lagered 8 to 12 weeks, cold aged for 8 to 12 weeks before it's packaged. And to get good, fresh Pilsner beer, in the Czech Republic, in Germany, somewhere near where it's made, wow, what a difference. What a difference. So, okay, so, before the Industrial Revolution, this was a drinking vessel. Ceramic, clay mug, or tumbler. So, when malt was dried, so malting the grain soaked in water till it absorbs about 40% of its own weight in moisture. It's put into a humid room till it starts to sprout. Knock the sprouts off, and then you dry it. 1500s, 1600s, the technology of the day was open fire. Screens in a room with a fire, smoke, direct heat, inconsistent, really hot in some spots, not so hot in other spots. So some areas the malt's black, some areas the malt's light tan. It all has some sort of smoky flavor to it. That's what beer tasted like, okay? It looked inconsistent in color, anywhere from deep amber to pitch black, with the exact same process, the inconsistency of drying over a fire. So at about the same time that glass was invented, indirect heat, have your fire or your gas fire, your wood fire in this area, push the hot air through pipes and heat the vessel, indirect heat. Now we're making yellow beer. And about the same time, late 1700s, the British are developing pale ales, and the Czechs are developing Pilsner malt, and Pilsner beer. So yellow malt, yellow beer, and it's no longer in this clay, opaque vessel. It's in this new miraculous clear vessel, so you can see how light in color it is. And if you still want to drink the dark smoky beer, you can see what color it is. So in Germany, you can't, with very rare exception, you're not allowed to use clay ceramic mugs anymore. You have to use glass. It's a consumer protection thing to make sure you're getting the right beer. And then in every country except this one, there's a standard, there's a mark on there that says the liquid should come to this line. And they get blind shopped by inspectors who come around, and if you're not, the foam is below that line, you get a mark. So many marks on your license, the manager goes, so many more, the owner goes. So it's a big deal. Consumer protection with beer. We should do that in this country. So glass instead of wood or ceramic or pewter. The malts are dried away from the color, so now you've got color variability. And shortly thereafter, the use of thermometers starts, saccharometers, where they can measure the amount of sugar. So your beer is getting more consistent, more consistent. That's where you start to really develop styles. And certain areas start to, depending on their industrial process and the grain that you can grow there, or the hops that you can grow there, starts to really separate yellow beer from amber beer, from dark beer, cold aged beer, from ale beer. And that's where things really, really start to separate. So it's really 1700s and later when styles start to develop. So King Henry VIII was drinking a beer in England in the 1400s, very similar to the beers that were being produced in Germany, because it was just malt over a fire, a little bit of hops, not so much, they just didn't know much about it. It was just some beers used seasonings, cinnamon, mugwort, depending on what grew around, nettle, depending on what grew in your country. So that's where the variations were, but the base of the beer, the color of the beer, the smokiness of the beer, the inconsistency of the beer, pretty similar. So not so much style differentiation as there is now. So this word, Gemütlichkeit, everybody say it together. Gemütlichkeit, in German it means all good things to you. I wish all good things to you. Warm greetings, good food, friends, nice glass. So this poor man is having a terrible time. This was at the Hofbrauhaus. I had taken a bunch of folks on a beer tour, and we were at the Hofbrauhaus, and this was just before Oktoberfest. But you can see a nice, in the lower left, a nice full glass of nice clear golden Helles, and the foam is standing 2 to 3 inches above the top of the glass. And there's a rim around there, like on this glass, there's a rim cut in the glass, and that's the line on that glass. So the foam should not extend below that line. And that's a liter of beer, so it's 33.8 US fluid ounces. But you can see, if you look around, people of different cultures, different dress, some a little more, traditional, some a little. What do they all have in common?
Beer.
They've all got a beer.
They're all smiling.
There you go.
They're all smiling.
There you go. They're all having a good time. They're all enjoying where they are. This is my neighbor Dennis in the black sweater. But that's what Gemütlichkeit is. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you are. And that's a lot of the beer styles of Germany. That's why the beer hall. That's why the big tables. That's why, the quick service. But in some areas, like Munich, younger people are starting to say, well, we want some of those popsicle flavored beers like they have in the United States. It kills me to go over there and see those kinds of beers when they have these gorgeous wheat beers and dunkel dark lagers and fest beers and Maybach and just all the wonderful beers that they've made traditionally for centuries. And a lot of them are walking away from it. Other thing, I'm not sure if it mentions farther or not, this is a very important invention, right? It's a mug with a lid on it, right? So this is what helped to end the bubonic plague. There's a saint in Ireland, a saint in Belgium, and a saint in Germany, Bridget, Arnoldus, and Augustine, that are saints because it's considered that they stopped the bubonic plague in their country. The bubonic plague was basically dysentery, and right, and bad water. What made the water bad was that it was the outhouse, and the water intake was frequently downstream from the outhouse. People just didn't know any better. The monasteries, nuns, brothers, priests, whatever, a lot of them lived in cloistered or semi-cloistered situations. The monastery tended to be high on the hill. The tallest thing in the town was supposed to be the church or the crucifix. So the monasteries were up on the hill, had their own well, which was not used as a restroom, so the water was clean and pure. They had lots of free time when they weren't in church to make records of what they did when they were making their beer, their wine, their bread, their cheese, growing crops on their farms. They were the keepers of knowledge, and they're the ones that started the breweries. So there's still one outside of Munich called Weihenstephan, and in English that means Holy Stephen. It looks like a very confusing word until you think, oh, that says Holy Stephen, and you look at it, you can figure out, and now you speak German fluently. Okay, you're good. If you know Weihenstephan in Ein Lager Bier bitte, I'll have a beer, please. That's it. You can get anywhere you want to in Germany. So they were encouraged by these people to drink beer, not water, or drink wine, not water. That's where the tradition of wine or beer with food, with your meal, comes from. And then the lid on the mug was very important because it would keep fleas, flies, bugs out of your beer or your wine, and that made it a more healthful drink than water from the stream, lake, whatever. So, there, we've ended the bubonic plague, let's have a beer. Regionally, in Germany, so from Munich to, this happens to be Cologne. If you look out the window, kind of the upper right, you see this gray, that's a Gothic cathedral. It's the biggest Gothic cathedral around, I think. It's referred to as the Dome, the home cathedral. And if you look at the beers in the tray, that's Kolsch beer, K-O-L-S-C-H, Kolsch beer. So, and that glass, that tall, thin tube, so it looks like you can see one on the table here. I've got a live sample of it here in the room. It's about 7 3/4 to 8 ounces, again, line on it. And that's kind of 2 to 3 sips. And that's the beer of Cologne. If you go to Cologne, you don't get a 1 liter mug of Helles Lager like you do in Munich, or an Oktoberfest beer like you would in Munich. They tend to sit at smaller tables. It tends to be smaller, quieter conversational groups. I mean, you need this big giant church, you gotta be a little bit respectful.
I've been to Cologne.
Yeah, awful. That's, so I made 4 trips to Cologne, and with various groups, gone to at least 3. So whenever I go to Cologne, we go to at least 3 of the different beer houses and have the Kolsch beer. And I ask people when we're all done, which one was your favorite? And on every single trip, it's been Goffel Kolsch. And this restaurant is enormous, and it's right across the street from the cathedral, so it's very easy to find. But the tradition here is that this guy will keep bringing this tray around, and as you can see, it's got 2 tiers to it. So on the upper level is empty glasses, and on the bottom level is full glasses. So he just goes back and to the bar, and the bar is a counter that's maybe 5 feet, despite this being a very large restaurant. They pick up a full tray, they drop off an empty tray. That's all there is to it. They serve one beer. They serve Goffel Kolsch there. And at Fruit, they serve Fruit Kolsch. And at Peter's, they serve Peter's Kolsch. And that's it. That's all they serve. You get a coaster in front of you, you do not drink beers without a coaster in front of you. That's rude in Cologne. And Munich, glasses are pretty big. A coaster would have to be about 6 inches across. Be more like a Frisbee. So they set that down. The other reason for it is the waiters are referred to as Kobs, nickname for Jacob. Just a lot of them happen to be named Jacob. It's like Joe, or in the States, you know, the barber is Tony and the bartender is Joe, and it just works out that way. So the Kobs come around, and in most of the beer stubes, they wear a white shirt or more commonly a blue shirt that almost looks like denim, and a dark blue apron. He's wearing a dark blue apron. It's just kind of hard to tell from the light. And he will set the beers down, and if you have a little bit left in your glass, he will take a full glass and just tap it on your glass, like, pick it up and drink it. You're in my way. Oh. You finish your glass, he sets down the full one, he takes your empty one, he makes a little pen mark on that coaster, and that's the accounting method. And then when it's time to cash you out, the way you let him know that you're done is you put a coaster on top of your glass. If you do not put a coaster on top of your glass, he's going to bring you another one. And they just don't take no for an answer. They pretend that they don't speak English. Oh no, I couldn't have any more. Well, your glass is empty, you're getting another one, and there's the mark. So somebody at your table is drinking this beer. Until you put a coaster on top of your glass, and then that means I'm done. And then he will take that coaster, ring it up, and bring you your check. So, same country, very different customs, very different beers. The Kolsch beer is very light. The closest thing in the States to it is a cream ale, but cream ales are made with some measure of corn or rice to lighten the color. This is made from just very pale malted barley up to 5% malted wheat. It's not enough to make it hazy like a Munich-style Hefeweizen. And Hefeweizen means wheat beer with yeast. So Weizen is wheat, Hefe is yeast. So yeasted wheat beer. And it's really the yeast that makes it cloudy, that keeps it cloudy. And in a Hefeweizen beer, most of the flavor comes from the yeast. It's not necessarily from the malt, it's not from the hops. They're in there, but they're very subtle. Most of the flavor comes from the yeast. The vanilla, banana, clove, allspice kind of notes that you get from a Hefeweizen, that's from the yeast. And different breweries use different strains, so there's different accents. So 35 miles from here is a city called Düsseldorf. And in Düsseldorf, they drink alt beer, which is more like the paper cup I'm drinking out of, a short. It was a common style of glass in Buffalo, where you go into a bar and all they had was bottled beer. So that short barrel-shaped glass holds about 8 or 9 ounces, and they serve alt beer and only alt beer, and it's an amber-colored beer that has a very different flavor profile from the Kolsch. Now this is like 5%, and the Kolsch, or the alt beer is like 5.2%. So still very drinkable levels, small glasses, down they go, down they go. But you do not order alt beer in Cologne, and you do not order Kolsch beer in Düsseldorf. Those people genuinely do not like each other, and they think each other's beer is made from some sort of bodily function. I think you can figure it out. So, fest beer, again, the Gemütlichkeit, food, big mugs, big tables, lots of people. This is not the biggest hall, this is the Lebenbrau Hall, and it only seats 8,200 people for seating. The Spaten tent seats 10,000 people, and there's 3 seatings a day, 7 days for 3 weeks. So beer props up the German economy big time. They had, no kidding, the country nearly crashed because they didn't have the money from those sales of beer. Glass and glassware. Very, very important. So the mugs, let's back up one. These big mugs that you see on the table, really thick glass, really heavy bottom. When you toast, you don't hit the tops of the glass together. Notice that on every type of glass I have here, the bottom of the glass is the thickest part. That's the part that you tap together to make your toast. And here's something very important. When someone raises a glass toast, whether they tap the glasses or just raise the glass, and you respond in kind, you do not set the glass back down. That is an insult. So if you raise it, even just, touch it to your lips and wet your lips, take some touch of the liquid from the glass, that completes the toast. Set it back down, it means I don't trust you, or I just don't like you. So, very important thing. But safety is a big part of this. They're glass, they're easy to clean, you can see what's in them, you're getting fair measure, but also think about, this little girl is carrying 6 of those mugs that weigh, what do we figure out, 3 1/4 pounds each. So every trip, she's carrying at least 20 pounds of beer and glasses around, and she's not big. So
don't get in her way.
That's correct. You have to keep the aisles clear. So she's got a whistle around her neck. It's kind of flat, and that string is elastic. So when she picks up the beer, she puts the whistle in her mouth, then gets her beer and goes, and if you're in the aisle, she blows her whistle. If she has to blow it a second time, 2 very large, handsome German men, not necessarily in lederhosen, are going to carry you out the nearest door. They will pick you up one by each elbow, and they're really good at it. I've seen them do it. I have not been picked up. I am not that stupid.
Or the older women, they would carry 12.
Oh yeah.
And if you got in their way, they just run you over.
Yeah, but they're risking injury to themselves doing that.
It's a lot of beer to waste.
The whistles, and in the spot in 10,000 people, you hardly ever hear a whistle because everybody's out of the way. They know the drill. Yeah. There's very few rookies at Oktoberfest. Correct glass. In this country, we have that cocktail shaker pint, and bar owners go, well, I can stack them, and I can, it's safer. You could hammer nails with a German Stein. It's not, the pint glass is not safer, it's cheaper. So here again, we're still in Germany. Germany is known for beer. I'm going to speed up here a little bit. It's lunchtime, so notice all the young people here. Not a lot. So these folks are, they can all be in this room at the Cheektowaga Senior Center. Most of them. So there's working men. Those are work shirts, and the color means something. I probably cut out a picture. There's a couple of workmen, carpenters with overalls. Carpenters wear blue overalls, and plumbers wear a different color overalls. You can tell what they do by what they're wearing. But this young lady in the foreground is a waitress. She's got a glass of water, a glass of beer, a couple of plates. What looks like an ice cream stand in the background is a beer stand. All around this square, you can see on the left side of the beer stand, and if you look in the background, up on the right side of the beer stand, you can see there are small market stalls, and there's a sausage maker, and there's a fishmonger, and there's a cheesemonger, and there's a florist, and there's somebody who does wicker baskets. So you can get food there's one restaurant that serves this whole area. If you order from them, you're going to wait a while. Or you can get your own food and get your own beer and sit down. Yep. And then at this stand, every 6 weeks, there's 5 breweries in Munich, and every 6 weeks, it rotates. So it's Spaten for 5 weeks, 6 weeks. Spaten for 6 weeks. It's Hacker Shore for 6 weeks. It's Polliner for 6 weeks. So everybody gets a shot at summer, everybody has to suffer through winter. Everybody's there on a rainy day. Everybody gets a sunny day. So we're gonna go to England. So instead of the great big tables and the great big space of the beer hall, we've got the more intimate situation of the pub. And we've got glass. So this one is kind of going on a fashion, the mug, especially the dimpled mug. And you can see on the table over toward the right, a British pint. It's an imperial pint, which is 20 ounces. The traditional British styles of beer that are best known are bitter, which just means it's a hop accent. It doesn't mean that it's actually bitter. Or mild, which is more malt accented. Mild can be pale, it can be brown. Bitter can be amber, it can be golden, it can be fairly dark. With the bitter style, the more words in front of the word bitter, the stronger it is. So bitter is about 3%, maybe 3.5%. Special bitter, 4%, 4.5%. Extra special bitter, 5%. And then above that, you get into India Pale Ale at 6% and above, or what they call winter warmers. They go above 6%. So, but generally speaking, beers you get in the United States, if you get light beer, it's 4.2%. If you get regular Miller, Labatt's, Budweiser, 4 3/4 to 5%. So what the British consider strong beer is regular beer over here. 5% is special bitter. Sorry, extra special bitter. So again, notice the bright sunny weather in England, and yet people are sitting outside. Tables are all full. So, and that's true anywhere in Europe. So here we've got the Theakston glass. That's a 20-ounce pint glass. That's their ordinary bitter at 3.5%. My wife, who is right there with the green scarf on, she's drinking the Theakston Old Peculiar, which is a 6% beer. She likes her dark beers. She likes porters and stouts and that. And then this nice light lunch. Again, this is from the town of Masham. It's outside of London. It's a smaller town. The Theakston is the local brewery. The Theakstons have been running it since 1627, I believe it says. That's a pork pie. That's a cold meat pie. This is some pickles of different kind. Pickled beets and pickled onions. Apple chutney. Some grapes. A hunk of fresh bread. And behind that, that's not butter, that's cheese. A British cheddar. So that's lunch for two. And of course, beer to wash it down. 20-ounce pint, 10-ounce half pint. That's the standard service there. So we were kidding about all the new cool beers and the donut flavor beers and the sour popsicle beers and all this kind of stuff. So this was at the Theakston's. I toured the Theakston's brewery, okay? I know you're surprised. So Theakston's, in this advertising approach, they're trying to keep their current friends. They don't like to say old friends. I'm old, I can get over it. If you're lucky, you get to be old, right? Keep your current friends and try to make some new, younger friends. The craft beer, there was a craft beer before there were any craft beers, okay? Consistency, solid, identifying with the current words. Same, we've always made good beer, is what they're going after. Next one, and the great thing is it actually tastes of beer. Beer flavored beer. I tried that fruit salad ale once. Slipped out for a crafty pint, went for a Theakston instead. And this is one of my favorites. Honey, this isn't getting the spare room painted. So in England, the pub is the living room. So they live in most Europe, UK, the cities are old, they live in small spaces. The beer hall, the pub, that's where they meet their friends, that's where they entertain. So now we're in Belgium. So notice the shape of this glass, and I've got a ceramic version here. What does that look like?
Chalice.
A chalice. And where would you find a chalice? In church. So we talked about the breweries, a lot of breweries starting as monasteries. Holy Stephen Monastery near Munich. This is the Chimay, the Blessed Mother Monastery at the Abbey du Scourmont at the town of Chimay. That's where this is made. This is handmade by one of the brothers that works there. And the only time they can talk is in prayer, in the chapel, at Vespers, at church, at Mass, or they can talk in their workplace about work. So the brothers that work in the brewery can talk about beer and brewing. The farmers can talk about plants and planting when they're out in the field, the cheese makers, and so on and so on. So besides the religious significance of the chalice shape, this really helps. You can see in this picture, look on the top, on the surface, it's got a very rocky appearance. That foam, you can almost float a coin on that foam. It's so dense. Now, if you took that and put it in a different shaped glass, it'd pour some nice foam, but it wouldn't have that guts to it. It wouldn't have that concentration to it. The shape of the glass really helps build it and hold it. So that's, and then the fact it says Trappist. So triple, Tripel, is the style of beer, golden color, hop accented, and it's a mere 9.5%.
Oh.
So these are not the beers that the brothers drink on a daily basis. So all the monastic beers, and there's 5 left. Four of them are in Belgium, and one of them is in Holland. Achel is in Holland. Westmaal, Orval, Chimay, and West Vleteren are in Belgium, and they're still owned as monasteries by the church, by the brothers, the different orders of brothers that are there. And the beer, they make 4 beer styles. So they make an everyday beer, and for the most part, they don't distribute that beer. That's just consumed in the monastery. It's about 3%, 3.5%. Again, they're not drinking water so much. They're having a beer with lunch, they're having a beer with dinner. It's at 3%, 3.5%. And they would drink one of these stronger ones on their saint's feast day. If it's Brother Stephen on St. Stephen's feast day, everybody might have a triple or a Grand Reserve and, silently drink a toast to Stephen on his feast day. It's more important than their birthdays. So even into Buffalo, every area, every brewery, every style of beer has its own history, has its own culture behind it. This was in the boardroom at the Schreiber Brewery, and the building had fallen into great disrepair over time. Try it distributing with a little help from one of their brewery customers. That's me smiling. Came in and hired an art historian to rescue those, get them out. They bought them from the guy that owned the building at the time. Had an office furniture business, so he just had desks and chairs and stuff stored in the old packaging part of the brewery. So they came up and into the boardroom and got these out, and they're painted on canvas, and then the canvas was glued to the wall, and they've got that arch shape on the top. It's about 2 feet on the sides and about 4.5 feet in the middle, and they're about 9 or 10 feet long. So they're big murals, and each one depicts supposedly a great event in brewing history. There's a little problem with this one. Where are those people from? England, Ireland, Germany, Belgium, Nordic countries, Iceland, Greenland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. That's not beer they're drinking. They didn't grow barley there. They didn't grow hops there. They made mead, which is a wine strength beverage made from honey and water. So this is a little inaccurate. And what really tips it off is the horn. No culture drank beer out of horns. They're mead horns. So, but there's other ones. There's Louis Pasteur in a lab. There's Egyptians, Mesopotamians, Sumerians with straw baskets, using straining grain out of a primitive mash. So,
Where did you put them?
so no, they're actually at
Oh, they,
Try It Distributing. They have a big amphitheater
oh.
room that back when they used to have sales meetings of over 100 people, you could see all those hanging in there. And now they do sales meetings over Zoom. So, but this was in the Schreiber Brewery. Schreiber is a German brewery, but they merged with a brewery that made a beer called Manru, and that became, Manru was a Polish opera, so it was a Polish-owned brewery, but they came together, and there's the Schreiber building. So a brewery called Buffalo Brewing is in the old packaging warehouse side of this. And the part that you're looking at here, the blue part of the building, is supposed to be made into apartments or offices. So, again, Buffalo is a big beer city. The culture, German. They were the biggest, the mostest. So this was, the Ziegler family owned this, and this is an exaggerated drawing. This is Washington Street in front where all the carriages full of barrels of beer. That's a pretty accurate part of the drawing. But the side street here that you're looking at, that's stable, it's an alleyway, and then that building, that first building behind it is actually Ulrich's Tavern.
Oh.
So that's a little artistic license there. But this building went all the way over to Goodall Street and most of the way back to Ellicott Street. So, yes, that is now Trico building. So the building was cut off. So if you're zooming with us, if you look at the part in the center where it says Phoenix Brewery, on the left side of that, there's kind of a pillar, and you cut it from there to the right. That all became Trico, the inventor of the windshield wiper. So where it says Ziegler Brewing Company up top, it now says Phoenix Lofts. So across Virginia Street Washington Street, from where the brewery building stands now, is where they originally built the building. An old wooden style brewery, earlier version of the brewery, started digging lager cellars behind as technology became that way. Again, technology of the day, wood and fire to heat and store. Wood burns and burns fast. So they had a fire, 2 people died in the fire, and Mr. Ziegler said no one was ever going to get hurt at his brewery again. And then he became the benchmark for safety in brewing for a long, long time. So this building was the first commercial building in Buffalo made from steel and brick. And it's 3 courses of brick on this first floor, and it seems goofy, but you can see where there's a door about in the middle of the building. You would go upstairs to the first floor. You can see some windows right along the sidewalk. The basement is 16, 18 feet deep. And down there were big kind of hydraulic compressors. So a tank with an arm that would plunge into it, and it would compress ammonia gas. And as you compress ammonia gas, it cools, and then they would run that through iron piping up through, and then some of this floor and all of this floor was tanks, horizontal tanks, like old dairy tanks. And there was iron pipes all around the outside of the building. How do I know this? That was going to be the original site of Flying Bison Brewing Company. The guy that owned the building at the time did not live up to the contract that we signed, and it got real ugly. And it held us up for 3 years. It only cost us $9,000 to be right. So, the problem with those compressing ammonia is the gas tends to resist this process. And the arms, if they came flying out too fast, would kill people. So brewing was a very dangerous business. So anyway, Trico cut that. It's the Phoenix Lofts. Oops, wrong way. Sorry. There's what it looks like about 6 years ago. Lang's Brewery, another German brewery. This was referred to as the Brewer's Palace. So you see the big fountain in front, that great big door in the very middle of the building. when you walked in there, marble floor, polished brass rails to go up to the offices, and then these buildings off on the left, and the kind of follow along on the left, you can see smokestacks back there. In the distance, that was the malting house. So the grain was steeped and dried and turned into malted barley. And then on the left side of the bigger, prettier building, you can see the big stack. That's the big one that would fire the boiler that would boil the beer and do the cooking. So Lang's was the biggest brewery. It started to fall apart, fall out of favor as Iroquois was growing. And Iroquois ran past them, became part of the International Brewing Company group, and was distributed around the whole northeast of the country. So DC up to Maine and Pennsylvania to the Atlantic Ocean. Sorry, wrong way in. Lots more, and we talked about German influence. Buffalo was a very German city. This was a very German country. Early on in our founding, at the early Continental Congress, they took a straw vote, what should the official language of our country be? And there were 13 colonies, and 7 voted for English, and 6 voted for German. So the winning vote for English was Benjamin Franklin, who was representing Pennsylvania at the time. So in the lower left, we talked about my last name being Herzog. That's the Herzog family castle. It's called Hohenschwangau Castle. And if you've ever heard of Neuschwanstein, the Walt Disney castle, Cheek Cheek Bang Bang flew around it, that's just down the road. So crazy Uncle Luitpold built that, and they actually never finished Neuschwanstein. So there's parts of it that are just, walls are just kind of filled in with bricks. They never finished the castle. He actually bankrupted the state of Bavaria building that castle.
And we were at that castle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where you went to buy your tickets,
Yeah.
when you were facing the ticket window, Neuschwanstein is on your right, Hohenschwangau is on your left.
Oh, really?
And when you go there, inside the front door is the Herzog coat of arms, and as you leave, you go out the back and kind of down a ramp and through a gate, and over the gate,
Oh.
it's a coat of arms. So that's, I don't have a set of keys to it.
Darn.
Yeah, but there is a really super nice beer garden across the street. So then we get into kind of history of brewing in Buffalo, which is outside of what we were talking about today. So but you can see before Prohibition, 29 breweries in the city of Buffalo. Now the city of Buffalo at that time was Delavan to South Park. That was the city of Buffalo.
Was
Yes.
it true that if every bar only had that
Yeah.
kind of beer?
Uh-huh. That's before Prohibition. So they were referred to as tide houses. A number of English pubs still operate that way, where Fuller's Pub owns a certain number, Fuller's Brewery owns a certain number of pubs. They serve Fuller's beer and only Fuller's beer. It was that way in Buffalo. Where Flying Bison is on Seneca Street, when we chose our address, there's actually 5 pieces of property to make that one piece of property. We chose 840 Seneca because there's just a nice round number. Everybody knows where Seneca Street is, starts at the ballpark and goes into West Seneca. So everybody knows where that is. But 840 was kind of the middle property on the front. As we were doing title search, that was a barrel house for the Simon Brewing Company, which is 5 blocks away from there. The building's still there. Bill Simon IV still lives here and drops by for a beer once in a while. But a barrel house was, and you've all seen these pictures, they're usually sepia tones, so kind of shades of brown. It seems like a row of men with really handsome mustaches that seems to go back forever into the dark. And bowler hats or flat caps or whatever, standing with their foot on the rail, spittoons and a beer in front of them. So that was a barrel house. The building would be about 12 feet wide, maybe. They served beer, and only beer from that brewery, and usually just one style of beer. Once in a while, they would have usually Friday, it would show up just before quitting time, ham sandwiches or pea soup, or something that was very salty. Sandwiches 5 cents.
More beer.
More beer.
See, you got it all figured out. You could all own barrel houses. Chicken wings are terrible with beer.
Yeah,
The grease on your lips kills the beer.
but that's why they did it though.
Yeah.
People would get thirsty.
Yeah, it's a cheap snack.
Pretzels.
Peanuts.
Yep, pretzels, it's bread, it's got salt on it.
Peanuts.
Was,
Yep.
Iroquois the last brewery closed?
Yes.
And
Simon closed in 1970 and Iroquois closed in 72.
I remember years and years ago, they had a rat cellar and
Yeah.
store.
Yeah.
It was fun. You
Yes.
had a group of people down there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's what the modern tap room is in a brewery. And that wasn't allowed until 2014. So from Prohibition to 2014, you could not go to a brewery and have a pint of beer. But once the brewery's closed, or the Rathskeller was in a different part of the building, they could call it a different address,
Oh,
that was still kind of allowed.
that was fun. I remember that.
Yeah. Well, go to a modern brewery tap room and you won't see anybody crying. That's the whole idea, that word Gemütlichkeit. Whether it's a British style pub or whether it's a German beer hall or a Belgian cafe, this is a place where you can come, you can sit down, you can be safe, you can have fun, and you can get yourself home. So, I'm out of time. Any questions, thoughts, beer jokes? Then this is where I say thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you at another one.
Thank you.
All right, cheers.
I like the Chelsea's one. Can I take a picture of that?
Yeah, sure.
Beer saved the world.
Beer saves the world.
You did.
And you've been there. You went.
Right.